yeah, so we're going to talk about JavaScript classes and a couple other ES6 features that are commonly used in React. So to create a class, so we're gonna kind of model HTML. So we'll have a few classes. We'll have a base class, which is like a generic HTML tag class, and then we'll create a couple subclasses. So HTML base. And I'm gonna, for the sake of imports, these files are gonna be .mjs instead of .js. This is just to allow the more modern import stuff. You don't have to worry about this when you get to React, because it's gonna be set up that way. But yeah, so this will allow us to do the more modern imports that we'll see in React. Okay, so HTML base class. So does anyone know how I can create a class in JavaScript? Okay, that's fine. So just very similar to Python. So the concept is the same. You'll be able to transfer your conceptual knowledge from Python to JavaScript and a lot of other things as well. So first is keyword class, and then the name of your class, HTML base. This could be whatever you want. And then we're going to use curly brackets for the body of the class. And that is the minimal definition. So we've actually just created a class. I mean, it doesn't do anything interesting, but it is a class. And if I want to create an instance of a class,
you have to use the constructor function.
Okay, good. Yes, so there's a constructor function. So we'll talk about creating one of those. So how is that related to creating an instance?
I think it's similar to dunder init. So it kind of defines this just off the top of my head. I think it worries about the parameters that are coming in and how to define that class or object when you instantiate it.
Okay, good. Yeah. So we'll get to that in a second. But before we implement a constructor, how can I create an instance of this class? The answer is we have to use the new keyword, which calls the constructor, so it's related to that, and HTML base. And that's it. So it's a little different than Python. You have to use this new keyword to create an instance, but other than that, pretty similar. So I want to run this. Okay. I could console log this. Should I make this bigger? Let me make this a little bigger. Okay, so I've created an instance of this class, which doesn't really do anything. So Dan, let's go to the constructor. So if I want to initialize HTML base with something, I have to have a constructor that it's actually called constructor. This is just like the Python dunder init. So whatever I pass into the constructor is going to be what this instance starts out with. So any properties I want it to have, I can pass them in here. So we'll start out with a tag, so we can pass in a tag name like div or nav or image or whatever. So how do I assign whatever I pass into the constructor to an instance variable?
This keyword?
Yeah. So you use this. So this dot tag equals tag. This should look familiar to you from Python. Instead of self, we use this, and this kind of this is always available, right? In Python, we have to explicitly pass in the instance, because Python does this a little bit differently. With JavaScript, we don't have to do that. So we just pass in what we want, like a normal function, but we always have access to this, so we can just attach it to this, the instance. So now if we do this, it should run the same, except, well, it won't run. Or actually, it will run, because JavaScript doesn't throw errors if you don't pass in enough or too many parameters. It just assigned this. It gave this undefined. I didn't pass in anything. So let me pass in something like div. And there we go. And I can console log the tag directly. So dot tag. And I get the div there. So any questions so far? Okay. So conceptually, this should be very familiar territory. We just use constructor instead of dunder init, and this instead of self. Okay, now methods. Methods are also fairly straightforward. So let's have a method called could do call it build tag. And then let's just take this string and we'll format it into an HTML tag. I'll just do something like this for now. Okay, and then I'm going to call HTML.build tag.
Chad, my JavaScript syntax is rusty. When you're defining that function, you don't have to precede it with function or do like a chat arrow.
Yeah, that is a great point. So because this is a method, you don't have to say function whatever. In fact, I don't think you can. So you can do it this way, which actually looks more like Python than JavaScript, or you can do something like you can use an arrow syntax. So build tag equals, I think you have to make it a constant, but we'll do this real quick. Let's see, just got the arrow. You can do it like this as well, which ends up being the same. So this one will work either way. Okay. All right. So we have our base class here. We have a constructor, we have an instance property, and we have a method. So what I want to do here is I want to create two subclasses. I want to create a self-closing tag and I don't know what the term is, but like a two-part tag, like a normal two-part tag. Does anyone happen to know what the name for that is? Like the regular opening, closing tag. Okay, I'll just call it regular tag then. So we've got, let's do self-closing. Self-closing and class self-closing. And it's the same kind of thing. Now the difference or the problem, split this, is that I want to inherit HTML base. How do I make self-closing inherit from HTML base? So we've got two problems. First is, what's the syntax for making something inherit from something else? The other thing is, how do we access HTML base from this file? So let's take care of the import first. So the import works a little bit differently. The first difference is that you have to explicitly export. So in Python, you could just write a file and then you could import it somewhere else, and that was it. Here you have to explicitly export something, and then you also have to explicitly import it. So there's some variations in this, but export default, this is what you're going to see with React almost all the time. So if you just have a single class in a file, then export default. You can also export multiple classes, but so export default HTML base. So you just add that line to the bottom of your where you've defined this class. So now we have this file right here, and it's now importable. So we come over here into self-closing where we want to use it, and we do import HTML base. I'm getting some help here. I'll just auto-complete that. So you import HTML base from, and then what you give it here is the relative file path as a string. So you don't always have to include the extension. I think if it's just .js, you don't have to, but in either case, this is a string relative file path. So import class name from relative file path. Okay, now within this file, we have access to the HTML base. So I want to make self-closing inherit from HTML base. In Python, we would do that. We would just do something like, right, HTML base. We can't do that in JavaScript. Instead, what we do is extends. We use this extends keyword, and then the class we want to inherit from. So that's how you do inheritance. Extends. Now there's a limitation here in that you can't do you can't do multiple inheritance. So this class can only inherit from one parent class. That's just how it is. Okay, so we've got self-closing inheriting from HTML base. So I can create an instance of this. Should be able to do that. And then okay, so what did I do wrong here?
The parentheses are actually calling sorry, lost my thought.
That's okay.
Oh, it's missing the new keyword.
Yeah, it's missing the new keyword. So I was trying to do it like Python, and I get this error. It's telling me that there's something wrong right here on line 8. And type error, and it pretty much just tells me exactly what is wrong. Class constructor, blah, 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 cannot be invoked without new. So new is basically a way of calling the constructor, which is going to initialize the instance or create the instance. So new, let's try running this again. And we get that div. So notice that we didn't add anything to self.closing. So it's basically the same thing as HTML base. It has direct access to everything, just like a normal class anywhere else. Any questions so far? Okay. So, but we don't want self.closing to be exactly like HTML base. That would be no fun. So we're gonna, let's see. Yeah. So I want to override this build tag. So I'm actually going to copy this. Let's copy the whole thing. So I've got this build tag, which I'm going to override. And then I think, does it come after? Something like that. If that's wrong syntax, please let me know. But so now what I want to do is I want this HTML base. I want it to be an abstract class. I want it to just kind of house, like describe what an HTML tag is in general, but I don't want anyone to create an instance of just like a generic HTML base tag. So one thing I can do, you can't really have abstract classes in JavaScript. So one thing I can do is throw an error. Is it raise? Yeah. You can throw an error. It says something like that. So what does this allow me to do? Any guesses? What happens if I go back here to my original version of this? I try running this and I get this error. You must implement this method. So what this means effectively is like, this is just, it's an abstract class. It's just a model. It's almost like a class of a class. It's a class that describes class. So I'm going to have to implement this. So any subclass is going to have its own build tag. So what I'm saying basically when I create this as a base class is that every single thing that inherits from HTML is going to have a way to build a tag. It's going to have its own build tag method. Do that. I run it, and then I get the div with the slash at the end right here. Which I think is the right syntax, but I'm not sure.
Stylistically, I think there's a space between the tag and the slash, but I don't know that it's necessary.
Thank you. I'll take it. Let me. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. Now let's do, so self-closing, let's do another subclass. I'll create another file. Let's do, I don't know what to call them, so I'll call regular tag. And I'm gonna take do some copy pasting here. Actually, I'll go ahead and write it out. So first thing, let's start with the class regular tag. And I know that I'm going to have to inherit from HTML base, so I'm going to import it. So import HTML base autocomplete from the string of the relative path to the file. And then I'm going to extend it and HTML base. Okay, good. And then if I want to create an instance, I can go here and do regular tag. I have the new keyword, regular tag, and I'll pass in P. Tag. We'll run this. And I get this error. Basically telling me that I have to implement my own version of build tag. So let's do that. Return. And I'm gonna paste this. Copy that. So I'll do that and we'll try this one more time. Okay, so now I get the opening and closing tag there. Any questions about this so far? Okay, so let's say now that a regular tag, I also want, let's say I also want to initialize it with some kind of inner HTML. So there should be something in between here. So in order to do that, I'm going to need to, when I create an instance, I'm going to need two pieces of information now, not just one. So I'm going to need the tag, and I'm also going to need the inner content. So I'll just say, so I'm going to have to, because I'm essentially changing the constructor now, right? I'm changing the constructor for regular tag, which inherits from HTML base. So I'm going to have to override this constructor. So I'm going to take two things, the tag and the, let's just do inner text, we'll call it. Okay. So there's a little, well, let's just see what happens now. And I'll add this here. Okay, so I get an error. You can look at it. It's occurring on line 6, which is right here. So it's in the constructor, and I get an arrow. So something's wrong here. And the error description says reference error. Must call super constructor in derived class before accessing this or returning from derived constructor. Does anyone have any guesses what that might mean?
Isn't that similar like when you're calling the super in the dunder init in Python?
Exactly, yeah. So there's a method in Python called super, which gives you access to the super class. And JavaScript has the same thing. So what it's saying is you have to, because regular tag inherits or extends from HTML base, and if I want to override the constructor, I have to call this constructor first. That's just how JavaScript does it. So I don't have a choice. So if I want to start using this, here, I'm going to have to call the parent class's constructor. So super, and I will pass in tag, and now I can get rid of this line. And now our regular tag can get printed here. So any questions about that? Okay, so I'm just going to kind of tie all this together real quick. So I'm going to create app.js, and I'm going to import. I actually don't care about HTML base because I'm not going to use it directly. It's kind of just an internal thing. I'm not going to use it when I create stuff. So I'm going to import self-closing. It's not wanting to fully autocomplete for me. Import. Okay. So I'm going to create a couple instances.
Hey, Chad.
Yeah.
Do you have to also export from self-closing regular?
Yeah. So I'm doing a couple of things wrong. Thank you. So one, to enable this newer import stuff, I renamed this file to m.js, and then I also, thank you, have to. So I've exported from HTML base. Since I'm going to now import regular tag and self-closing tag, I have to also export them. So export default self-closing, export default regular tag. Okay, so I've got my export statements now, and I should not have an issue with my, so what's it saying? Okay, so should be good here. So I'm going to create an instance, self-closing. What am I doing wrong already?
Need the new keyword.
Yeah. And I'll just console.log build tag. Okay. And then it's going to take two things. So it's going to take a tag. No, actually, div is not a self-closing, so let me change the image. Okay. And this now runs. So I create an instance of the self-closing tag, which inherits from HTML, which is not, it's not part of my external API, so I don't need to worry about it. And then regular tag, same thing. Any questions about that? Does it seem pretty like maybe familiar, or is anyone having some trouble with this? Of course, no one will admit that. So, okay, that's fine. So if you have more questions or would like more examples, I'm happy to do that. Okay, so I think that's enough for classes. So let's just real quick basically review the spread and rest operator. Okay, so if I have an array, let's just do this. If I want to assign all of these, or just this one, right? So this third one, I want to give it a name, basically. So I could do so that works. And I could do the same thing for all of these. I could rename this one and then rename that one and so on. So that's fine. You can also basically deconstruct this. This is also something you can do in Python. You can deconstruct this. So let's do so. And this does the same thing. So I'm basically like deconstructing this list here, and then I can reassign. Basically, I can reassign all of the values at the same time on one line. I can also do stuff like, let's say I only care about one. I can do so now one, I'm assigning this first element is going to be assigned to one, and this ... just basically all the rest of them are going to get grouped into this variable called others. So notice that others is an array. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, so you can also do the same thing with an object. So if I create an object, so you can do the same thing, right? You can also deconstruct this. So const, let's do Oh, right, sorry, I forgot. Yes, so with the object, you have to keep the original name. So you don't have to do this, it's not Python. Sorry. So I'm deconstructing this object, and I can basically pull out all of the keys. So instead of, if I want to reference B here, instead of doing my object, dot B or whatever, you can just pull those out. You basically pull them up one level. So I have kind of direct access to these variables and values. And if you wanted to rename this one, for example, you can use this syntax, which is not necessarily something you're going to see very often, but you can. So now I could do that. So I'm saying I'm going to pull out all of the keys A, B, and C from this object, and then I'm going to rename B to second. So that's pretty much it in terms of using React. Some of the newer syntax features, I mean, that's a lot of what you're going to see. Any questions?
I can see how it's handy, but I'm struggling to see how I would use it.
Yeah.
Is there an example you could just throw at us?
Yeah, I mean, in React, you'll see it because every component. So it's hard to explain without talking about React, but every component that you make is going to get a whole bunch of properties, which is basically like an object. And you might not want to use all of them, or you might it just eliminates a lot of boilerplate for React, especially. So pulling out things like this. So if I'm taking in an object rather than, so if I have an object with 10 things in it, whatever, let's just say 3 things, and I just want 2 of them, well, I could do this, and then I just start using A and C. Maybe I don't even care about, yeah. I can just start using A and C immediately, whereas I would have to do some boilerplate lines where I do const C equals my object at C. I think I just do that here. I'll comment this out. And you can imagine doing this like 5 more times. So it just creates a bunch of boilerplate lines at the beginning of every component that you have. Whereas if you do something like this, it's just a one-liner and it's just a little cleaner. So I mean, you don't have to do it. Yeah, you don't have to use it. It's something that you'll commonly see. So
That helps.
yeah. So if you're looking at examples, it's basically everywhere. So if you're not familiar with it, it's not like a React specific feature. It's ES6 JavaScript. Okay. Yep, that's all I wanted to, just a warm up, JavaScript warm up for next week.